Kerala, India, July 25th, 2001. In the skies above this forested region of rolling hills in the southwestern state of Kerala, storm clouds begin to gather. Not so unusual in this part of the country. But when the rain starts, no one is prepared for what falls from the sky. Something that appears to be blood. And it lasts not for hours or days or even weeks, but for months.
If I put myself in the shoes of these people that experience this blood rain coming from the sky, I can only imagine how terrifying that must be, and how that must make those people question their own existence, question the forces of nature that are at work in the world. That must be earth-shattering for these people.
You have to think that that's sent from the heavens for some reason. Some mystical reason this happened, because it's sent from the gods. It's sending out a signal or a message for some reason.
After months of wondering whether the apocalypse was at hand, residents sighed in relief as suddenly the scarlet deluge stopped. And just like every other time this strange phenomenon happened throughout history, the skies returned to normal.
Similar stories of red rain have essentially spanned history over thousands of years. It's been repeatedly reported, first in mythology, and then in historical accounts that goes back maybe to the 6th century BC.
We have stories in our theology and mythologies that see this phenomenon happening, so it must be one of the signs of the coming apocalypse. But it's a phenomenon that occurs in weather around the planet all the time.
You never know where red rain is going to occur. It's all depending on weather systems. All over the world, there's been rain like this, even in the United States. Even in the Ukraine and Russia, this has taken place.
It's not surprising that ancient people regarded blood falling from the sky as a sign of impending doom. But today, we tend not to believe in such far-fetched nonsense, especially because, as I'm sure you'll be relieved to know, blood rain isn't actually made of blood.
Scientists did analysis of this red rain and did not find things like copper or iron, things that we think of as red, that would cause this water to be red. So why was it red? What else could have been in the water that made a blood red rain?
What scientists thought is that it is caused by spores that are on trees, grassy areas, rocks, all over the terrain there in India. And those spores blast all of that into the atmosphere, and that's carried up into the clouds, and it kind of hangs there.
Oftentimes, spores are produced prolifically, billions and millions of spores, right? Go all over the place. And so you can imagine that it would be transported up in the atmosphere associated with rain and then come down as a red color as well.
The theory that red algae spores can and do create red rain is believed by most scientists to be a sound one. But believe it or not, there's another theory. One which proposes that blood rain is caused by something extraterrestrial.
If you look at the red rain under the microscope, what we found was absolutely staggering, because we found that there were red living cells dispersed in the rain. That was the cause of the red color in the rain. And these cells were in the process of actually reproducing. And when examined under the highest magnification, these cells didn't look like anything that we had seen on the Earth.
Life, unlike any on Earth? Could it be that the real cause of blood rain is far more profound than previously thought?
Coincidentally, there was also a meteor explosion in the area. So the question is, could those two events be linked?
What I think happened was that a fragment of a comet exploded in the high stratosphere, And this comet had living entities, alien life, in the form of these red cells, and they became the seeds, the nuclei of raindrops.
We found plankton organisms on the solar panels of the International Space Station. So it's possible that this meteor that exploded over India had some sort of red organic material in it that came from space.
If the source of blood rain is, in fact, extraterrestrial, might it help explain how life could have started here on Earth?
One theory of how life can propagate from one planet to another, and even one star system to another, is panspermia.
Panspermia is the idea that life on the Earth started in outer space. And sure enough, when we look at meteorites on the Earth, we find some from Mars, some from the Moon, and maybe even some from Venus. And so if meteors can go back and forth, why not DNA?
Can people really see the future? Receive messages from across time and space? For centuries, seers and prophets have come forward, offering dramatic visions of mankind's destiny. But what happens when the predictions turn deadly? Well, that's what we'll try and find out. Paris, France, 1555. Astrologer and physician Michel de Nostradamus publishes a volume of 4-line poems called Quatrains. Readers at the time are confused by the author's use of multiple languages, word puzzles, and what was, even then, considered antiquated syntax. But perhaps even more baffling is the volume's title, Les Prophéties, the Prophecies.
Nostradamus had become initially famous as a almanac writer. You've got to understand that this is during the time of the printing revolution, and he was one of its first best-selling authors. Then he embarked on a history of the future, which would look at everything up to the year 3797 AD, nearly 1800 years from now, and beyond.
The Prophecies was initially met with outright skepticism and derision. Many believed Nostradamus to be either a fraud or mentally ill, possibly both. Likely due to the fact that one of his verses scandalously foretold of a particularly gory death for Henry II, the King of France.
Nostradamus made a prediction about Henry II dying in a jousting accident. Quatrain 35 read that a young lion would face the old in traditional combat. He shall be pierced through a gilded cage, 2 wounds made one. The joust happened exactly as he foretold it. Both men had lions on their shields. Large shards went through the gilded visor of the king. One penetrated his forehead into his brain, the other in between his eye and socket, destroying his eye. And he died of infection of the brain 10 days later, an agonizing death.
After the king's death, Nostradamus' reputation as a seer of the future grew rapidly, which was, at the time, not necessarily a good thing.
It is well known that Nostradamus concealed the nature of his prophecies, which at that time was very politically incorrect and could have gotten him in a lot of trouble.
He would have come into great conflict with the church if he put himself on a pedestal and be like Noah or Moses or people like this.
Despite the controversy, the Prophecies eventually became one of the most widely read books in the world. It both astounded and terrified readers with its predictions about dreadful events to come. Is it possible Nostradamus received his prophetic visions because he was in touch with a higher power? It's an interesting theory and could help explain how Nostradamus was able to see and know things that would not happen for centuries, things he was trying to warn us about.
Predictive analytics is a fancy way of saying, look at the data and figure out why things happen. Very important. banks, corporations, computer companies spend hundreds of millions of dollars sifting through tons of data trying to find instances of causality. If I raise the price of a product, does my profit margin go down? Will I go bankrupt? In other words, corporations constantly try to predict the future. That's the name of the game. You predict it wrong, you zag when you should zig, you go bankrupt.
I think predictive analytics operate very similarly to how our brains work. Our minds come equipped to make predictions about the future based on our past experiences, and they operate very similarly. In fact, machine learning algorithms, the type that carry out predictive analytics, are often called neural network models because they're designed to mimic how neurons work in our brains.
The idea of advanced computers pulling information from the cloud in order to predict the future may sound like science fiction, but in truth, this idea has been around for thousands of years.
Every culture in history has had some concept of a universal mind. The Greeks used to call it nous, or a great overmind. In Vedic tradition, it's sometimes called akasha, or a kind of universal ether.
People like Nostradamus and any seer will tune into what we call the Akashic record. This is like the memory of all things. It's a universal mind. We enter it by going into a state of meditation and connecting with the past, the present, and the future.
One of the great secrets of the mystical tradition is that all human souls are one. So we are part of a collective whole. In later psychology, it has been understood to be called a collective unconscious. In ancient times, it was referred to as a collective soul, which is the collective mind of all humanity, past, present, future.
I think the people who work in this way, what they're doing is they're tapping into some source of information. I don't think the question is, why are we able to get information about the future? I think the question is more like, why don't we get more information about the future?
A universal mind, all-knowing and all-encompassing. But do we really want to know everything before it happens? Time of our own death, perhaps, or the fate of our loved ones, or how about the end of the world? Perhaps we're better off not knowing, letting those things remain. The unexplained. Oxford University, July 2008. A panel of experts from the Future of Humanity Institute published the results of a survey regarding the global catastrophic risks that humanity will face in the 21st century. The results of the questionnaire are both surprising and concerning, because the experts agree that there is a 1 in 5 chance of human extinction before the year 2100.
At the 2008 Oxford Conference, participants considered nanotechnology, artificial intelligence, and war to be the 3 categories that were most likely to bring about such an event. Personally, the one that keeps me awake at night is the unbridled development of artificial intelligence. It's partially because of the weaponization of artificial intelligence, what I like to refer to as the dark triad of offensive, lethal, autonomous machines. The possibility of programming errors or of users deliberately inflicting these upon enemy populations is the type of thing that makes me nervous. The development of artificial intelligence is supposed to make lives a lot easier, but in practice might represent the biggest existential threat of all. When we see a civilization that effectively disappears without a record of precisely why they left, the answer is often rooted in the development of advanced technology. Because advanced technology enables a larger population to live in a smaller area. But if something happens to the resources themselves, then you don't have the capacity to support the population anymore.
When I look at an episode like Rome making an incredible drainage system out of lead pipes, and then everyone goes nuts. Is it all that different than a human society building up technology to the point where we forget that we're really just part of an ecosystem that's much more powerful than us, no matter what we build?
We have a tendency to assume that we can always innovate our way out of the crisis of the moment. There's also no guarantee that technology will save a civilization when it's faced with an existential threat.
Will we live to see the day when our own civilization comes to an end? Given how advanced we've become, it seems unlikely that all of our current technology, our cities, architecture, culture, could ever be reduced to a giant pile of rocks and a few carvings. Well, then again, maybe it's our naive belief that it can't happen to us that makes our demise inevitable. So is there any way we can prevent it? Perhaps the answer will be one more that for now remains unexplained.